The most dangerous thing a corrupt officer can do is believe nobody's recording the truth. Rain hammered the streets of West Detroit just after midnight, turning the pavement into a river of blurred neon reflections and flashing red lights. The city never really slept, but at that hour it felt hollow, like everyone with hope had already gone home. A police cruiser sat crooked across the shoulder of the road, headlights cutting through the storm while traffic crawled past at barely 20 miles an hour. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out slowly, one hand resting near his belt, his cold blue eyes fixed on the black sedan parked ahead of him. Inside the vehicle, Darius Cole kept both hands on the steering wheel exactly where they could be seen. Calm, still, controlled, the way he had trained himself to be every time flashing lights appeared behind him. Because men like Darius learned early that staying alive sometimes meant staying quiet. Rain rolled down the driver's side window as Mercer approached. His boots splashed through puddles while police radio chatter crackled from his shoulder mic. "License and registration," he said flatly. Darius handed them over without hesitation. "Everything all right, officer?" Mercer barely glanced at the documents before smirking. "You tell me." His flashlight drifted slowly across the dashboard, then the back seat, lingering longer than necessary. "Funny thing is, I know this car." Darius felt his stomach tighten. Not fear exactly. Recognition. He had seen Mercer before. 3 traffic stops in 6 months. Same stare. Same tone. Same quiet hatred hiding behind a badge. "I haven't done anything wrong," Darius said calmly. Mercer leaned closer to the window, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "That's what all of you say." The words hung in the air heavier than the storm itself. Cars rolled by slowly now, drivers pretending not to stare. Somewhere in the distance, thunder growled low across the skyline. Darius stayed silent. He knew how these moments worked. One wrong word, and suddenly the story changed. Suddenly the officer became the victim. Mercer stepped back from the window and tapped the roof of the sedan twice. "Step out of the vehicle." Darius obeyed immediately. The cold rain soaked through his gray sweatshirt within seconds as he stood beside the car with his hands visible. Mercer circled him slowly like he was already hunting for something to accuse him of. "You nervous?" Mercer asked. "No, sir." "You should be." Then it happened. Fast. Subtle. Almost invisible beneath the storm. Mercer opened the rear passenger door for less than 2 seconds. His body blocked the view from the road completely. But when he stepped back, his expression had changed. There it was. That smile. Small. Sharp. Certain. "Well, look at that." Mercer muttered loudly enough for nearby officers arriving on scene to hear. "Seems we found ourselves an illegal firearm." Darius froze. "What?" Another cruiser pulled up behind them, lights washing the entire block in red and blue. A younger officer stepped out, confused, watching the situation unfold. Mercer reached into the car and lifted a black handgun wrapped loosely in a cloth. "You want to explain this?" Darius stared at the weapon in disbelief. "That's not mine." Mercer chuckled under his breath. "Sure it isn't. Imagine standing there in the pouring rain, watching a stranger manufacture your future with his bare hands while everyone around you already assumes you're guilty. Imagine realizing the truth no longer matters because the badge speaks louder than your voice." Darius looked around at the growing scene, at the flashing lights reflecting off wet pavement, at the people slowing down to watch another black man being placed beside a police car at midnight. Mercer moved closer, lowering his voice so only Darius could hear him. "I told you before," he whispered coldly. "You don't belong on my streets." Then the handcuffs clicked shut. The ride to the precinct felt longer than it really was. Rainwater slid across the cruiser windows in distorted waves, blurring the city lights into streaks of red, white, and gold while Darius Cole sat silently in the back seat with cold metal around his wrists. Officer Ryan Mercer drove without saying much, one hand resting casually on the steering wheel as soft static from the police radio filled the silence between them. Every few seconds Mercer glanced into the rearview mirror, not looking at Darius like a human being, but like a trophy he had finally managed to capture. Outside, Detroit drifted past in shadows. Closed gas stations, flickering liquor store signs, empty sidewalks glistening under streetlights. The kind of night where nobody stopped to ask questions because everyone already knew how these stories ended. Darius kept his breathing steady. Slow in, slow out. It was the same technique he had learned years earlier working long nights repairing armored vehicles during military deployments overseas. Stay calm under pressure. Stay sharp when everything around you starts falling apart. But this was different. In war zones, danger usually announced itself honestly. Here, danger smiled through a badge and wrote reports afterward. When the cruiser finally pulled into the precinct garage, the storm had only grown worse. Thunder rattled the building while officers moved through the station carrying coffee cups and paperwork, barely glancing toward Darius as Mercer walked him inside. Nobody asked questions. Nobody seemed surprised. That was the frightening part. It looked routine, like another black man entering the system exactly where they expected him to be. The fluorescent lights inside the station buzzed faintly overhead, washing everything in a cold, pale glow. Mercer removed the handcuffs only long enough for booking photos and fingerprints. Face forward, he muttered. Darius complied silently while the camera flashed against his tired eyes. Click. Another mugshot. Another file. Another name waiting to disappear inside a drawer. Across the room, a younger officer stood watching quietly. Officer Tyler Reed. Barely 24 years old. Fresh academy haircut. Nervous posture. He glanced between Darius and Mercer with visible discomfort, like something about the situation did not sit right with him. Mercer noticed immediately. Problem, Reed? Tyler hesitated. No, sir. Mercer smirked, then stopped staring and finished the paperwork. Darius lowered his eyes, but he noticed the hesitation too. Small cracks. Tiny moments people thought nobody saw. Sometimes systems did not collapse all at once. Sometimes they cracked slowly from the inside. The booking officer slid paperwork across the counter without emotion. Possession of an illegal firearm. Possible intent charges pending investigation. Darius stared at the words for a long second. His entire future reduced to black ink on cheap paper. He thought about his mother sitting alone at home waiting for him to bring her prescription refill after work. She would be staring through the apartment window by now, wondering why he was late. The thought tightened something deep inside his chest. Mercer leaned against the counter nearby, sipping coffee like he had already won. Funny thing, he said casually. Guys like you always act surprised. Darius finally looked up. Guys like me. Mercer shrugged. You know exactly what I mean. Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere deeper inside the station, a phone rang. Officers laughed at something near the break room. Life moved on normally while Darius stood there watching his name slowly become another statistic. Imagine standing in a room full of people sworn to protect justice while realizing not one person plans to protect you. Imagine understanding that your innocence means nothing once somebody powerful decides otherwise. Tyler Reed shifted uneasily again as Mercer signed the arrest report. His eyes drifted briefly toward the evidence bag containing the handgun, then toward Mercer, then back toward Darius. A tiny flicker of doubt crossed his face before disappearing completely. But Darius noticed it. And for the first time that night, beneath the humiliation, beneath the anger, beneath the cold weight pressing against his chest, something else appeared quietly inside him. Hope. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the storm outside had finally started to weaken, but inside the holding cell the air still felt heavy enough to crush someone slowly. Darius Cole sat alone on a narrow metal bench beneath dim fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead like tired insects trapped in glass. The room smelled faintly of bleach, wet concrete, and old coffee. Somewhere down the hallway, a television played low evening news while officers laughed between shifts, their voices echoing through the station like nothing important had happened tonight. But for Darius, everything had changed. He leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees, staring quietly at the floor while rainwater dried slowly on his jeans and boots. His wrists still carried faint red marks from the handcuffs. Not painful, just humiliating. That was the part people never understood. Sometimes the worst damage was not physical. Sometimes it was the feeling of being erased in front of strangers while nobody cared enough to stop it. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought about home. Apartment 4C. Small kitchen. Old heater rattling near the window. His mother sitting in her recliner wrapped in a blue blanket waiting for him to walk through the door with her medication and groceries. Evelyn Cole hated when thunderstorms rolled through Detroit at night. They reminded her too much of the years after Darius's father died, when every knock at the door felt like bad news waiting to happen. Darius always called her if he was running late. Always. But tonight his phone sat sealed in an evidence locker while she waited alone with no answers. The thought hollowed something inside him. Across the hall, Tyler Reed stopped briefly outside the cell door, holding a stack of paperwork against his chest. He looked uncertain again, like he wanted to say something, but could not figure out whether speaking up was worth the risk. Darius glanced toward him calmly. You ever wonder if somebody can lose everything because one person decides they should? Tyler shifted awkwardly. I do not make those decisions. No, Darius replied quietly. But you watch them happen. Tyler lowered his eyes. For a second, neither man spoke. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy, confident. Officer Ryan Mercer appeared carrying a paper cup of coffee and wearing the same smug expression he had worn all night. Still awake? He asked casually. Darius did not answer. Mercer leaned against the bars. You know what your problem is? He continued. You people always think acting calm makes you innocent. Darius slowly looked up. And people like you think a badge makes you right. The hallway fell silent. Tyler looked visibly tense now, his eyes darting between them. Mercer took another sip of coffee before stepping closer to the cell. Tomorrow morning the news will run your mugshot. Your job will hear about the arrest before breakfast. Your landlord will hear about it next week. And by the time this case reaches court, nobody will remember your side of the story. He smiled slightly. That is how this works. Imagine hearing someone describe the destruction of your life with the same emotion people use discussing the weather. Imagine realizing the system was never designed to discover truth, only to protect the people controlling it. Darius stood slowly from the bench until he faced Mercer directly through the bars. Calm eyes, steady breathing, no fear visible anywhere on his face. And somehow that irritated Mercer more than shouting ever could. You seem real confident for a man sitting in a holding cell, Mercer muttered. Darius stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. Because unlike you, he said quietly, I know exactly what happened tonight. Mercer's smile faded slightly, only for a second, but Tyler noticed it. Darius noticed it too. Tiny cracks, tiny shifts in confidence. Mercer covered it quickly with a laugh before turning away down the hallway. But something about his reaction lingered in the room long after his footsteps disappeared. Because for the first time that night, Darius did not look like a broken man waiting to be buried by the system. He looked like someone waiting patiently for the truth to catch up. Morning arrived slowly over Detroit, like a city struggling to wake up after bad news. Gray clouds still hung low above the skyline while cold wind pushed rainwater through empty streets lined with brick apartment buildings and flickering traffic lights. Inside the precinct, the overnight energy had faded into exhausted silence. Officers shuffled through paperwork with coffee-stained hands while television screens mounted near the lobby quietly replayed local headlines. Darius Cole sat at a small metal table inside an interview room, staring through the glass window at a world already moving on without him. He had not slept. Every hour inside that station had stretched endlessly, measured only by footsteps in the hallway and the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. A paper cup of untouched water sat in front of him beside the charging cable for the body camera footage Mercer had submitted as evidence. Official evidence now. Official lies. The door opened and Detective Elena Brooks stepped inside, carrying a slim case file under one arm. Mid-30s. Sharp eyes. Navy blazer slightly wrinkled from a long night. She introduced herself calmly before taking the seat across from him. Internal affairs, she explained. Standard review procedure whenever there is a firearm arrest involving officer conduct. Darius nodded once, but said nothing. Elena studied him carefully for several seconds. She had interviewed hundreds of suspects over the years. Most entered rooms like this angry, defensive, desperate. But Darius looked different. Tired, yes. Frustrated, absolutely. Yet beneath all of it was something else. Control. Like a man holding on to information nobody else realized mattered yet. Elena opened the folder slowly. Officer Mercer claims he discovered an unregistered weapon in your vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. Darius finally spoke. That weapon was not mine. Elena glanced down at the report. He says your behavior became suspicious after he requested identification. Suspicious how? Darius asked quietly. Because I was driving while black after midnight? Elena did not answer immediately. Outside the room, officers passed by carrying breakfast sandwiches and talking about football scores while a television reporter discussed rising crime rates downtown. Life continued normally around them, while one false accusation quietly threatened to destroy somebody completely. Elena folded her hands together. "Mr. Cole, I need honesty from you." Darius leaned back slightly in the chair. "Honesty is all I have." Silence settled between them. Then Elena slid a photograph across the table. The handgun, sealed inside an evidence bag beneath harsh fluorescent lighting. "Have you ever seen this weapon before?" Darius looked at it for only a second. "No. Officer Mercer says he recovered it from the back seat floorboard." Darius stared directly at her now. Calm. Focused. Then Officer Mercer lied. Somewhere deep in the station, a burst of laughter echoed briefly before fading away again. Elena noticed Darius glance toward the sound for just a moment. That tiny reaction carried more sadness than anger. Imagine sitting inside a police station knowing the people responsible for your future are laughing 10 feet away while your entire life collapses quietly on paper. Imagine realizing innocence alone is not enough when authority has already chosen its version of the story. Elena closed the file slowly. "You served in the Marines?" she asked unexpectedly. Darius nodded once. "Vehicle Maintenance Division. 8 years. Any criminal record?" "None." Elena looked back down at the paperwork. "Stable employment. Military history. Community references. No prior arrests." The profile did not fit Mercer's report at all. And something else bothered her too. The timeline. According to dispatch logs, Mercer called in the firearm discovery less than 90 seconds after removing Darius from the vehicle. Too fast. Almost rehearsed. Before Elena could speak again, the door suddenly opened. Mercer stepped inside, carrying his usual confidence like armor. "Everything going all right in here?" he asked casually. Elena's expression tightened slightly. "I am conducting an interview." Mercer smirked and leaned against the doorway anyway. "Just making sure our suspect is cooperating." Darius looked directly at him. No fear. No panic. Just quiet patience. Mercer noticed it immediately. "Funny thing about guys like you," Mercer said coldly. "You always think somebody is coming to save you." Darius answered softly without breaking eye contact. "No. I think eventually people start noticing the truth." For the first time all morning, Mercer's smile disappeared completely. By late afternoon, the storm clouds had finally broken apart above Detroit, but the city still felt cold and heavy under a sky the color of dirty steel. News vans crowded the sidewalk outside the precinct while reporters stood beneath umbrellas rehearsing headlines for the evening broadcast. Across local television screens, Darius Cole's booking photo had already started spreading through the city beside words like illegal firearm possession and possible gang connections. Nobody on those broadcasts mentioned his military service. Nobody mentioned the years he spent helping neighbors repair broken cars for free. Nobody mentioned his mother sitting alone in a silent apartment praying her son would come home safely. Because stories like this were easier to sell when black men looked dangerous. Inside the station, Detective Elena Brooks sat alone at her desk reviewing body camera footage for the 4th time. The small office around her was cluttered with old files, empty coffee cups, and stacks of unresolved complaints buried beneath years of paperwork. Outside her window, the sun was beginning to sink behind downtown buildings, washing the city in pale orange light. Elena leaned closer toward the monitor as Officer Ryan Mercer's footage played again. "Rain. Traffic stop." Commands shouted calmly. "Search conducted. Gun discovered." Everything looked clean at first glance. Too clean. Mercer narrated every movement with practiced confidence, almost like someone performing for an audience instead of documenting an arrest. Elena paused the video, rewound, played it again. There. For less than 2 seconds, the body camera angle shifted sharply downward during the moment Mercer opened the rear passenger door. Then static. Brief distortion. Then normal footage returned. Elena frowned. Most people would never notice it. But she did. Her fingers tapped slowly against the desk while unease settled into her chest. A knock sounded lightly against the office door. Tyler Reed stepped inside carrying another evidence report. "You asked for the dispatch logs," he said quietly. Elena took the papers without looking up. "Thanks." Tyler hesitated near the doorway. "Detective, can I ask something off the record?" Elena finally looked at him. Tyler swallowed hard before speaking. "Does something about this case feel wrong to you?" Silence lingered between them. Outside the office, officers laughed near the vending machines, while someone turned up the volume on a football game in the break room. Life inside the station continued normally, but Elena suddenly felt like she was standing in the middle of something rotten hidden beneath polished floors and official reports. She lowered her voice. "Why are you asking?" Tyler shifted nervously. "Because Mercer called for backup before dispatch even logged the firearm discovery." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are sure?" Tyler nodded. "I checked the timestamps twice." Tiny cracks. More of them now. Small details beginning to pull apart the story Mercer built so confidently the night before. Imagine discovering that the truth does not arrive all at once like lightning. Imagine realizing it creeps in slowly through timestamps, nervous glances, missing seconds of footage, and the guilty silence of people too afraid to speak. Across the station floor, Mercer entered laughing with two other officers, his voice carrying easily through the building. He looked relaxed again, comfortable, untouchable, like a man who had done this before and expected the system to protect him again. Elena watched him through the office blinds for several long seconds before turning back toward the computer screen. Then another detail caught her attention, the evidence photograph. She enlarged the image slowly until the serial number on the handgun became visible. Her fingers stopped moving. The weapon had been logged into police evidence 3 years earlier during a narcotics raid, officially destroyed afterward according to department records. But somehow it had appeared in Darius Cole's back seat at exactly the right moment. Elena sat back slowly, her pulse quickening for the first time all day. Outside her office, Mercer laughed again, louder this time. But suddenly the sound did not feel confident anymore. It felt careless. Because somewhere inside the growing pile of lies surrounding this arrest, somebody had made a mistake. That night the city felt quieter than usual, as if Detroit itself were holding its breath waiting for something to break. Rainwater still clung to sidewalks and parked cars while the glow of downtown reflected faintly across the river like blurred fire beneath the dark sky. Inside the county detention center, Darius Cole sat alone beneath dim lights listening to the distant sounds of metal doors opening and closing somewhere deep inside the building. The hours moved slowly there. Every second stretched longer when your future depended on people who had already decided who you were. Earlier that evening, his public defender had stopped by briefly carrying bad news wrapped in professional language. Bail denied pending further review. Local media pressure increasing. Prosecutors considering additional charges. Darius listened quietly without reacting much on the outside, but each sentence felt like another brick being placed carefully on top of his life. By now his employer had probably seen the news reports. His neighbors too. Maybe even his mother's church friends. People who used to wave at him in grocery stores would now lower their voices when his name came up. That was how reputations died. Not all at once. Slowly. Publicly. Quietly. A correctional officer walked past the cell carrying dinner trays while televisions mounted near the common area replayed the same story again. Former Marine arrested after illegal weapon discovered during late-night traffic stop. Darius looked away from the screen. Former Marine. 3 words. Years of sacrifice reduced to background detail beneath suspicion. Imagine spending your entire life trying to prove you belong somewhere only to discover one accusation can erase all of it overnight. Imagine watching strangers discuss your guilt before anybody even asks for the truth. But while the city accepted the official version of events, something else was already happening behind closed doors. Across town inside her small office, Elena Brooks sat surrounded by open files and glowing computer screens. The station had mostly emptied for the night, leaving only the faint hum of vending machines and the distant clicking of keyboards somewhere down the hallway. She had spent the last 3 hours digging through old complaints connected to Officer Ryan Mercer. Excessive force accusations, unlawful searches, missing evidence reports. Every investigation ended the same way. Insufficient proof. No disciplinary action. Cleared for duty. But one detail kept repeating through the records like a stain nobody wanted to acknowledge. The suspects were almost always black men. Elena leaned back slowly, rubbing tired eyes before opening another archived report. Then she froze. Same handgun serial number. Different case. For years earlier. Officially confiscated during a narcotics operation that Mercer himself assisted with. According to department records, the firearm should have been destroyed months afterward. Instead, it somehow reappeared in Darius Cole's car at exactly the right moment. Her pulse quickened. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. Real evidence. At nearly midnight, Tyler Reed entered quietly carrying 2 coffees. He looked exhausted. "You are still here?" he asked. Elena nodded toward the files covering her desk. "Sit down." Tyler obeyed nervously while Elena slid the firearm records toward him. His face drained of color as he read the serial number. "That is impossible," he whispered. "No," Elena replied softly. "It is corruption." Silence settled heavily between them. Tyler stared down at the papers like a man realizing the institution he trusted might be rotten underneath the surface. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Elena looked toward the dark hallway outside her office. "We find out how deep this goes." At that exact moment, 3 miles away inside the detention center, Darius finally lifted his eyes toward the small security camera mounted high in the corner of the ceiling. Calm, patient, focused. Then slowly, almost invisibly, he smiled for the first time since his arrest. Because unlike everyone else in that city, Darius already knew something they did not. The most important evidence from that night had never entered police custody at all. The courthouse downtown was already crowded before sunrise. Reporters gathered near the front steps with cameras balanced on their shoulders while cold morning wind pushed loose newspapers across the sidewalk. People lined up quietly beneath metal detectors inside the lobby, speaking in low voices beneath the glow of marble hallways and polished courtroom doors. Most of them had already seen the headlines. Former Marine. Illegal firearm possession. Dangerous suspect. By now the city believed it knew exactly who Darius Cole was. And that was exactly what Officer Ryan Mercer wanted. Inside courtroom 6B, the atmosphere felt tense long before the hearing even began. Prosecutors shuffled papers confidently, while officers leaned against the back wall, trading quiet jokes under their breath. Judge Harold Bennett adjusted his glasses while reviewing the morning docket with the bored expression of a man who believed he had seen every version of guilt already. At the defense table, Darius sat calmly beside his attorney, wearing a plain gray suit borrowed from a church friend. His face looked tired but composed. No anger, no panic, just patience. Across the room, Mercer entered in full uniform, carrying himself with the same arrogant confidence that had followed him through the station all week. Some officers nodded toward him respectfully as he passed. To them, he was the hero cop who got another illegal weapon off the streets. Another successful arrest. Another dangerous black man stopped before something worse could happen. Mercer glanced toward Darius briefly and smirked before taking his seat near the prosecution table. He looked completely relaxed, untouchable. But not everyone inside the courtroom shared his confidence anymore. Near the back row, Tyler Reed sat quietly, avoiding eye contact, while Detective Elena Brooks stood near the side wall, holding a thin folder against her chest. Inside that folder sat evidence capable of destroying careers, maybe entire departments. Elena had barely slept. The deeper she investigated Mercer, the uglier everything became. Missing evidence, manipulated reports, vanished complaints. Patterns nobody wanted to acknowledge because admitting the truth would force the system to confront itself. Judge Bennett finally called the courtroom to order. The low conversations faded immediately. Prosecutors began laying out the state's version of events with practiced certainty, while photographs of the firearm appeared on courtroom monitors. Mercer testified calmly about the traffic stop, repeating his story almost word for word exactly as written in the police report. Suspicious behavior. Nervous movements. Weapon recovered lawfully. Everything sounded polished, rehearsed, safe. But as Mercer continued speaking, Elena noticed something changing slowly inside the room. Darius never looked rattled, never interrupted, never reacted emotionally the way guilty people often did. Instead, he listened quietly, hands folded together, eyes steady like a man waiting for a specific moment to arrive. Imagine sitting inside a courtroom while strangers discuss your future like a completed decision. Imagine hearing lies repeated so confidently that truth itself starts sounding unbelievable. Mercer finished his testimony and leaned back comfortably in his chair. The prosecutor smiled faintly, clearly satisfied. Then Darius's attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "the defense would like to submit additional evidence recently recovered this morning." Mercer barely reacted at first. Neither did Judge Bennett. But Elena immediately looked toward Darius. And for the second time since his arrest, she saw that same quiet confidence return to his face. The attorney connected a small device to the courtroom monitor system while confusion spread softly across the room. "What evidence?" the prosecutor asked sharply. Darius finally spoke for the first time all morning. His voice was calm enough to silence the entire courtroom instantly. The recording officer Mercer forgot about. Mercer's expression changed immediately. Not panic yet, but something close to it. The attorney pressed play. Static crackled softly through the courtroom speakers for one long second before the audio became clear. Rain. Traffic noise. Then Mercer's voice. "You do not belong on my streets." Silence filled the courtroom. Every officer near the back wall froze. Mercer's face lost color instantly. But the recording was not finished yet. The courtroom remained completely silent as rain crackled softly through the speakers from the recording device. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the reporters near the back stopped typing for a moment as Officer Ryan Mercer's voice echoed through the room again, colder now, stripped of the confidence he usually carried behind a badge and official paperwork. "You do not belong on my streets." The words hung heavily beneath the courtroom lights, while every face slowly turned toward Mercer. His jaw tightened immediately. "This proves nothing," he snapped suddenly, shifting forward in his seat. But before anyone could respond, the recording continued. Footsteps. Rain hitting metal. Then Mercer's voice again, lower this time. "One little gun, and suddenly nobody listens to your side anymore." A sharp breath escaped somewhere near the jury box. Tyler Reed lowered his eyes instantly. Elena Brooks stood frozen beside the wall, her grip tightening around the folder in her hands. She already knew what was coming next because Darius had privately turned over the full recording to Internal Affairs hours earlier. But hearing it publicly inside a courtroom felt different. Heavier. More dangerous. Mercer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this audio could be edited." But Judge Harold Bennett was no longer looking at the defense table. He was staring directly at Mercer now, with visible tension spreading across his face. Because everybody in that courtroom understood the same terrifying thing at the exact same moment. Innocent men do not secretly record traffic stops. Men who expect trouble do. The recording continued playing. A car door opened. Rain intensified. Then Mercer's voice came through again, sharper now. "People like you never learn." And then finally the sound that changed everything. The faint metallic click of a rear passenger door opening followed by Mercer muttering quietly to himself. Almost too low to hear clearly. Almost. This should hold up fine. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Tyler Reed looked physically sick. Across the courtroom, several officers shifted uncomfortably while reporters scrambled to write faster. Mercer turned pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "Turn that off," he demanded suddenly. But the defense attorney did not move. Because the final part had not played yet. Imagine spending your entire career believing authority could erase truth. Imagine standing inside a courtroom realizing the very man you tried to bury had calmly prepared for this moment long before you ever touched those handcuffs. The recording crackled one last time before Darius's voice entered softly, but clearly. "You are planting evidence." Then Mercer answered immediately, without hesitation. "Try proving it." Silence exploded across the courtroom harder than shouting ever could. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Judge Bennett slowly removed his glasses while staring toward the prosecution table in disbelief. Mercer looked around desperately now, suddenly aware that the walls protecting him were collapsing in real time. The prosecutor quietly closed his case folder without saying a word. Elena stepped forward at last, her voice steady despite the tension gripping the room. "Your Honor, Internal Affairs has independently confirmed the firearm recovered from Mr. Cole's vehicle was previously logged into police evidence and officially marked destroyed 4 years ago." Another wave of stunned silence rolled through the courtroom. Mercer shook his head immediately. "That is not possible." Elena's expression hardened. It already happened. For the first time since his arrest, Darius slowly rose to his feet beside the defense table. Calm, controlled, dignified. He looked directly at Mercer while cameras flashed from the back rows. "You thought nobody would believe me," Darius said quietly. "Because men like you never expect people like me to survive your lies." Mercer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Judge Bennett finally straightened in his chair, his voice heavy now with something that sounded dangerously close to shame. This court is ordering an immediate suspension of all charges against Mr. Cole pending criminal investigation into Officer Mercer and any related departmental misconduct. Gasps rippled through the room. Mercer's entire face collapsed as two court officers approached him cautiously from behind. The same officers who had laughed with him only hours earlier now refused to meet his eyes. And standing in the center of that courtroom beneath cold fluorescent lights and stunned silence, Darius Cole did not look angry anymore. He looked vindicated. 3 months later, the city looked different. Or maybe people were finally seeing it clearly for the first time. Winter had settled over Detroit now, covering rooftops and sidewalks in thin layers of snow, while freezing wind swept through downtown streets lined with newspaper stands and glowing storefront windows. But despite the cold, crowds still gathered outside the courthouse almost every week as new details about police corruption continued spilling into public view. Internal affairs investigations had expanded rapidly after Officer Ryan Mercer's arrest. Missing evidence reports resurfaced. Old cases reopened. Wrongful arrests questioned. Suddenly, officers who once walked confidently through the precinct kept their eyes lowered whenever reporters appeared nearby. The system had not collapsed overnight, but the cracks were impossible to ignore now. Inside a federal hearing room, Mercer sat alone at the defense table wearing a dark suit instead of a uniform. No badge, no smirk, no authority left protecting him from the truth he once thought he controlled. The same courtroom officers who used to greet him with respect now treated him like any other defendant entering the building. Quietly, professionally, distant. Across the aisle, Detective Elena Brooks testified calmly about the evidence trail uncovered during the investigation. Manipulated reports, disappearing complaints, recycled evidence, patterns stretching back years. Tyler Reed testified too, his voice shaking slightly as he admitted the doubts he ignored during the arrest. Each statement peeled away another layer of the image Mercer spent years building around himself. And through it all, Darius Cole never once interrupted. He sat quietly in the gallery beside his mother, listening while the truth finally spoke for itself. Evelyn Cole held her son's hand tightly beneath the courtroom lights. Weeks earlier, she had cried while watching his mugshot spread across television screens. Now those same stations replayed headlines calling him the key witness who exposed systemic corruption inside the department. But even after public apologies and dismissed charges, some wounds remained harder to erase. Darius understood that better than anyone, because surviving injustice did not magically erase humiliation. It simply taught you how expensive dignity could become in a world determined to take it from you. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted slowly across the steps as reporters waited for reactions after the hearing ended. Cameras flashed immediately when Darius finally emerged through the front doors wearing a dark wool coat and gloves against the cold. Microphones stretched toward him from every direction. "Do you hate the police now?" one reporter asked quickly. Darius paused for a moment, looking past the cameras toward the city skyline, glowing pale gray beneath winter clouds. Imagine being treated like a criminal by people sworn to protect justice. Imagine watching strangers believe the worst about you simply because someone with authority told them to. Then imagine surviving anyway. Darius looked back toward the reporters calmly. "No," he answered softly. "I hate what happens when people stop valuing truth." The crowd fell silent instantly. Somewhere behind the cameras, Elena Brooks watched quietly while Tyler Reed stood nearby with his hands buried nervously in his coat pockets. Both understood now that this story had never only been about one officer or one arrest. It was about the danger of silence, the danger of systems protecting themselves instead of protecting people. Weeks later, Darius reopened his small auto garage on the east side of the city. The sign above the entrance read "Second Chance Auto Repair" in clean white letters against black steel. Neighbors stopped by constantly now, not because they saw him as famous, but because they finally saw him clearly. One cold evening, just before closing time, Darius stood alone outside the garage watching snowflakes drift beneath the streetlights while traffic moved slowly through the city around him. Peaceful, quiet, free. His phone buzzed softly with another news alert announcing additional arrests connected to the investigation. Darius read the message silently before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked up toward the dark Detroit skyline one final time. Ryan Mercer once believed power came from fear, uniforms, and the ability to control somebody else's story. But in the end, the thing that destroyed him was something far more powerful. Proof. Because badges can intimidate people. Lies can humiliate people. Systems can bury people. But the truth has a strange way of surviving long enough to be heard.